They say you can tell everything you need to know about a person by the way they smile at you. I didn't believe that until the night my wife, Marin, looked me dead in the eyes and smirked. It was a Tuesday, one of those oddly warm spring evenings when the world feels too alive to hide anything. We were sitting on the back patio, her nursing a glass of Pinot Noir, me trying to find the right words that had been clawing at the back of my mind for months. I asked her straight, "Marin, are you seeing someone else?" For a moment, she didn't say a word. She just swirled her wine, lazily, glanced at the horizon, and when her eyes finally met mine, she smiled. Not the smile of a woman relieved to be trusted. Not the nervous laugh of someone wrongly accused. No, it was the kind of smirk you give a chess opponent when you already know they've lost and you're just playing out the final moves for the fun of it. Something in me froze. It wasn't just fear or sadness. It was clarity, cold and brutal. That smile told me everything words never could. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I nodded slowly, stood up from the chair, and walked back into the house. While she stayed outside, probably thinking she had won some silent, twisted game, I sat down at the kitchen counter and made a plan. Her annual charity gala was coming up in 3 days. It was her pride and joy, her chance to flaunt her connections, her beauty, her carefully curated image. And she had no idea that I was about to shatter it without raising my voice or making a scene. All I needed was someone who could make her feel invisible, irrelevant, and powerless. And I knew exactly who to call. That night, while Marin stayed outside sipping wine under the stars, I texted someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman who had once made even Marin jealous, and who, as it turned out, owed me a favor. I smiled too, but it wasn't the same smile. Mine was the smile of a man who had just flipped the board while his opponent wasn't looking. And that was just the beginning. The woman I texted that night was named Celine Eris. If you're wondering about the name, yeah, it fits. She always sounded like trouble wrapped in elegance. And she lived it, too. Years ago, before Marin and I got married, Celine and I had a brief, intense connection. One of those almosts that never became anything serious because life pulled us in different directions. But we always stayed aware of each other. We were the kind of people who could go years without talking and pick up the conversation like it had never ended. When Celine's message came back only minutes later, it wasn't a question. It was just 4 words. "Tell me when, Logan." The next 3 days felt like a balancing act over a pit of snakes. Marin was colder than usual, making half-hearted excuses to leave early for work, staying out later, texting constantly under the table at dinner like I couldn't see her thumbs flickering. She didn't know that while she was building her little fantasy world, I was carefully arranging the moment that would destroy it. The night of the gala, Marin took nearly 2 hours to get ready. I watched from the doorway, pretending to sip my bourbon as she slipped into a dress so elaborate it looked stitched out of midnight itself. Her hair, her makeup, everything perfect, as if she was preparing for a coronation rather than a charity auction. "Don't be late," she said to me with that same smug curve at the corner of her mouth. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, meaning every syllable in a way she couldn't possibly understand. We arrived separately, her with her entourage, her clients and admirers buzzing around her like moths to a flame. I waited until the main hall was packed, the chandeliers burning bright, and the cameras flashing like 100 tiny betrayals. And then I walked in with Celine on my arm. It was like dropping a thunderclap into a room full of glass. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned. Marin, standing near the stage, locked eyes with me. And for the first time in years, I saw fear. Not because Celine was more beautiful, though she was effortlessly, but because Marin realized she wasn't the queen anymore. In a single moment, she had become just another face in the crowd, overshadowed and ignored. Celine leaned into me and whispered something that made me laugh loud enough for Marin to hear. Of course, we moved through the room like we owned it. And no matter how hard Marin tried to grab the spotlight back, louder laughs, exaggerated smiles, it was already gone. And the best part? This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even anger. It was just a message. I saw everything. I understood everything. And now I didn't care. But that was only the opening move. What Marin didn't know was that the real storm hadn't even started yet. After Celine and I made our entrance, the air inside the gala thickened, humming with tension that everyone could feel, but no one dared to address. Marin kept throwing glances in our direction, each one more desperate than the last. It was almost funny to watch her pretend that nothing had shifted when her entire world was quietly collapsing right in front of her. Celine was a master at this game. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She simply existed in a way that made everything around her look dull. Conversations naturally bent toward us. Smiles lingered a little longer on Celine. Invitations to private tables, offers of champagne, they came without us asking. Marin, for all her strategic networking and carefully chosen company, became background noise at her own event. The final blow came when the host of the evening, a major donor, walked up to our table and introduced himself to Celine. He didn't even acknowledge Marin standing a few feet away, trying to make herself visible again. Celine shook his hand, laughed lightly at some joke I didn't catch, and turned the spotlight permanently onto us. It was cruel. It was beautiful. Marin tried to recover. She marched to the microphone at the front of the hall to give her opening speech. Her voice, usually strong and magnetic, wavered under the pressure of dozens of eyes darting between her and Celine. Every stutter, every awkward pause, made the walls close in a little tighter around her. I stood at the back with Celine, one hand casually resting at the small of her back, and watched. And here's the thing, it wasn't anger anymore. It was pure detachment. Marin could have danced on that stage, burst into tears, or confessed everything into the microphone, and it wouldn't have mattered. She had already lost me the moment she smirked. After her speech, as the crowd started mingling again, Marin finally made her way over. Her face was a tight mask of rage and disbelief, but she kept her voice sugary sweet. That was always her style. Keep the knives hidden behind silk words. "I see you've brought a guest," she said to me, ignoring Celine entirely. "Yeah," I smiled. "You remember Celine, don't you?" Celine extended her hand politely, almost mockingly. Marin didn't take it. "You're making a scene," Marin hissed under her breath. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "No, Marin. You made the scene the moment you decided you were too good for honesty." She flinched like I had slapped her. Celine, sensing that her work here was done for now, excused herself to grab us drinks, leaving me and Marin alone in a bubble of tension thick enough to choke on. "You're going to regret this," Marin whispered. I chuckled quietly. "I already regret wasting years pretending you were someone you're not." She opened her mouth to snap back, but I didn't stay to hear it. I turned my back on her deliberately, slowly, and walked away. In that moment, in front of her carefully curated audience, Marin had become invisible. But what she didn't realize was that the real destruction hadn't even started yet. This was just the public humiliation. The private consequences were waiting for her just around the corner, and they were going to be much, much worse. The gala eventually wound down, but not before Marin made one last pathetic attempt to salvage her pride. As guests filtered out under the golden glow of the chandeliers, she floated through the crowd, clinging to every conversation, trying to act like she was still in control. But the shift was undeniable. People weren't looking at her the same way. Some whispered when she passed. Some smiled too politely, the way you do when you're speaking to someone you're already planning to forget. Her mask was slipping, and every second she stayed only exposed more of the cracks underneath. Celine and I didn't stay until the end. We didn't need to. The damage was done. I thanked the organizers, kissed Celine's hand for the theatrics, and we exited into the night like the whole event had been staged just for our benefit. But the real game began the next morning. I had spent the weeks before the gala gathering more than just courage. Through a private investigator, a man so discreet he made ghosts look clumsy, I had collected things Marin never imagined would see the light of day. Financial records, secret bank accounts, messages she thought were deleted, hotel bookings that didn't line up with her fake work trips, pictures, videos, everything. By the time Marin woke up that morning, nursing what I hoped was a crushing hangover of shame and confusion, my next move was already in motion. A delivery arrived at our house just after 10 a.m. An elegant white envelope placed carefully at her doorstep. Inside was a single flash drive. No note, no threats, just cold, indisputable evidence. I wasn't home when she found it. I had packed a single bag and checked into a boutique hotel downtown. I didn't need to see her reaction in person. I could imagine it vividly enough. The color draining from her face, the frantic scrolling through files, the sickening realization that she wasn't the puppeteer anymore. She was the puppet, and I was the one cutting her strings. Around noon, my phone exploded with calls. Marin's number over and over, then her sister's, then one of our mutual friends. I didn't answer a single one. I left them ringing into the void. Instead, I ordered room service, opened the window to let the city noise in, and took my time savoring the quiet. It wasn't happiness. Not exactly. It was something rarer, something purer. Freedom. Later that afternoon, my lawyer confirmed that Marin had been served with the divorce papers. Pre-packed, airtight, undeniable. Thanks to the evidence, she wouldn't walk away with half of what she expected. She wouldn't even walk away with the house. She wouldn't walk away with her spotless reputation either, because in the circles that mattered, the truth was beginning to circulate. But the final blow, the one that would make everything real, was still waiting. And I was going to deliver it in person. Not with anger, not with violence, not even with raised words, just with the kind of brutal calmness that once made her smirk at me in the first place. 2 days after the gala, after the envelope, after the endless calls and voicemails dripping with fake remorse and desperate bargaining, I decided it was time. If Marin wanted closure, she was going to get it, but on my terms, not hers. I texted her a simple message. Meet me at the conservatory at 3 p.m. Come alone. The conservatory was an old glass house at the edge of the city park. We used to go there when we were still pretending to be happy. She once told me it felt timeless, like nothing bad could happen inside those walls. How fitting, then, that it would become the place where she realized time had run out for us. When I arrived, Marin was already there, pacing near the entrance in a fitted black coat that looked like it cost more than my first car. Her face was drawn tight, her eyes darting nervously at every sound. For the first time since I had known her, Marin didn't look composed. She looked lost. She hurried toward me as soon as she saw me, her heels clattering awkwardly on the old stone path. "Logan, please," she started, her voice trembling just enough to sound human again. "We can fix this. Whatever you think you know, it's not what it looks like." I let her ramble for almost 2 full minutes. Excuses, half-confessions, tears welling in her perfect eyes. It would have been convincing, maybe, if I hadn't already seen the evidence myself. If I hadn't already spent nights staring at her fake business trips logged against romantic dinner receipts and hotel check-ins under fake names. When she finally ran out of air, I pulled a slim folder from my jacket and handed it to her. "These are the final divorce agreements," I said flatly. "Everything has been arranged. You can have your personal accounts, your car, and whatever you can fit in 2 suitcases. Everything else is gone." She took the folder with shaking hands, flipping through the pages like she thought she might find a hidden lifeline in the fine print. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice cracking. I shrugged. Neither was lying for years. Tears spilled down her cheeks then, genuine ones this time. But they didn't move me. Not anymore. Watching her fall apart wasn't satisfying. Not really. It just felt inevitable. Like gravity finally catching up to a stone someone had thrown into the air, hoping it would just float forever. "I made a mistake," she sobbed. I thought I needed more." I tilted my head slightly. "And now you have exactly what you wanted. Freedom." She shook her head violently, reaching out for my arm like she could physically pull me back into her life. I stepped back without hesitation. "You lost me the night you smiled, Marin," I said quietly. "That was when you chose yourself over us." I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't even raise my voice. I just turned around, walked back toward the gate, and didn't look back. Not when she called my name. Not when she started sobbing louder. Not when she finally realized that I wasn't bluffing. Behind me, the grand glass dome of the conservatory shimmered in the afternoon sun, trapping her inside like a memory she could never escape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light, untethered, like I was finally breathing real air again. But even then, a part of me knew that Marin's fall wasn't over. She hadn't hit bottom yet. Not by a long shot. The next few days after the meeting at the conservatory passed in a strange kind of peace. It was almost like the universe itself had sighed in relief when I walked away from Marin. I went back to work, slept deeper than I had in years, and for the first time in a long time, I started making plans that didn't involve calculating her moods or dodging her lies. Freedom didn't come in a loud explosion. It came quietly, like the sun rising after a never-ending storm. But Marin wasn't done yet. She didn't know how to lose gracefully. At first, she tried to flood me with guilt. Late-night calls, messages saying she had made mistakes, that she was ready to be better. Promises of counseling, of therapy, of anything if only I would listen. But I didn't because I understood something now. She wasn't sorry she betrayed me. She was sorry she got caught. She was sorry her perfect little empire was collapsing and nothing she could say would rebuild what she had already burned to ash. When the guilt tactics didn't work, Marin switched gears. Anger, blame, accusations that I had set her up, that I had humiliated her on purpose. She sent nasty emails, borderline unhinged texts, even tried reaching out to my family to smear my name. It was sad, honestly, watching a woman who once walked into every room like she owned it now claw desperately at anything that might restore her imagined power. What she didn't know, what she could never have guessed, was that her real reckoning was already unfolding behind the scenes. Celine had friends, too. Friends who moved in high circles, friends who knew how to pull quiet strings in industries where reputation was everything. I never asked for favors, but when Celine found out the full extent of Marin's deception, she made a few phone calls without me even having to suggest it. In the span of a week, Marin's world shrank. One of her biggest consulting contracts suddenly reevaluated their partnerships and cut her loose. Invitations to exclusive charity boards dried up without explanation. Old friends who used to fawn over her stopped returning her calls. It wasn't a coordinated takedown. No tabloids, no public scandals, just doors quietly closing, opportunities vanishing, people distancing themselves without ever saying why. To everyone else, it probably looked like bad luck, a streak of misfortune. But we knew better. It was karma moving with the precision of a scalpel instead of a hammer. One evening, a full week after the conservatory meeting, I sat at a rooftop bar downtown, nursing a whiskey and watching the city lights flicker like stars had fallen and scattered across the earth. My phone buzzed once against the table. It was a picture message from Celine. I opened it and smiled slowly. It was a candid shot someone had taken at a networking event Marin wasn't invited to. In the background, you could see her standing outside the glass doors in a sharp dress, clutching her purse. Her expression a mixture of rage and despair as she realized she wasn't getting in. Invisible. Exactly where she had placed herself the moment she chose betrayal over loyalty. I put the phone away without replying, finished my drink, and leaned back in my chair, letting the night wash over me. I wasn't celebrating her downfall. I wasn't dancing on the ashes. I was simply witnessing the consequences Marin had written for herself a long time ago. And if she thought this was rock bottom, she was wrong. The real moment, the one that would leave her truly alone, was still on its way, and I was going to be there when it arrived. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I orchestrated. Life simply aligned itself perfectly, as if it had been waiting for the right moment to deliver the last blow. I was attending a small gathering at the Harper estate, one of those quiet, invitation-only affairs where the city's serious players mingled without reporters breathing down their necks. I hadn't even thought about Marin when I accepted the invitation. She had once been a regular at events like this, moving from conversation to conversation like a shark slicing through calm water. Now, she was a ghost no one spoke about. But as I stood on the wide veranda with a glass of bourbon in my hand, I saw her. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't dressed for the event. She was standing near the valet outside the gates, arguing quietly with a man I recognized, one of the minor executives who used to fall over himself to gain her favor. Marin looked different now, thinner, her makeup just slightly off. The proud tilt of her shoulders collapsed into something smaller, tighter. She spotted me before I could look away, and she came straight for me. There was no audience here, no grand gestures, just Marin crossing the manicured lawn, her heels sinking slightly into the grass, her hands trembling at her sides. "Logan," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Please." Her voice cracked so badly on the word that I barely recognized it. For a brief second, I remembered the woman I had once loved, the ambition in her eyes, the laughter we used to share. But memory is a dangerous thing. It can make you forget the sharp edges you bled on. "You don't belong here," I said evenly. Not cruel, not loud, just the truth. "I know," she whispered, "but I don't know where else to go." It hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Not out of pity, not because I still loved her, but because it confirmed what I had suspected all along. Marin had never built a life for herself. She had built a performance. And when the stage collapsed, she had no idea how to survive without the applause. For a long moment, we just stood there in the soft night air, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifting from the house behind me. I could have turned away. I could have said nothing, but I didn't. Instead, I looked her straight in the eye and spoke the words she had once deserved to hear from me, but never had. "You chose this," I said. "Every lie, every betrayal, every time you thought you were smarter than everyone else. You chose it all." She tried to speak, but I lifted a hand and stopped her. "I'm not here to hate you, Marin. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to let you go." Her face crumpled, not dramatically, not like in the movies, but quietly. A woman realizing she was truly alone for the first time in her life. I stepped past her, walking toward the house without looking back. The valet was already moving to escort her off the property. And just like that, the final thread that connected us snapped. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt something better. Peace. She had made herself invisible. And now I had finally made myself free. But before I disappeared fully into my new life, there was one last thing I needed to do. Not for Marin. For me. The days that followed passed more quietly than I expected. You'd think that after burning down a life you once shared with someone, the silence would be deafening, unbearable. But it wasn't. It was just empty, like standing in a house stripped of furniture, knowing every creak in the floorboards by heart, but realizing you no longer belong there. I moved into a small loft on the other side of the city. Nothing fancy, just clean walls and tall windows that let the morning light pour in without permission. There was a kind of purity to starting over with nothing but a few suitcases and my name. But there was loneliness, too. The kind that clung to you in the middle of the night when you forgot for a second that the other side of the bed would always stay cold. Marin didn't try to reach out again, not directly. A few mutual friends sent messages in the following weeks, careful, cautious updates. They said she was still trying to salvage what was left of her reputation, that she had moved into a smaller apartment, sold her luxury car, started working jobs she once would have sneered at. They said she didn't smile much anymore. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt tired. The truth is, there are no real winners in a betrayal like ours. There are only survivors. And sometimes, surviving feels an awful lot like losing. One night, a few weeks after everything ended, I found myself standing outside the conservatory again. I hadn't planned it. I was just driving and somehow ended up there, staring at the grand glass dome reflecting the stars. I thought about all the things we had once dreamed of, the promises we made under those very same stars, the life we could have built if she had just been honest, if I had seen the truth sooner, if we had both been better. But life doesn't deal in what-ifs. It only deals in consequences. I stayed there for a long time, hands stuffed deep into my jacket pockets, breathing in the sharp, clean night air. And then, quietly, I said goodbye. Not to Marin, not to the memories, but to the man I had been when I loved her. The man who believed love alone could save anything. I turned and walked away from the conservatory without looking back, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the night. Some stories don't end with anger. They don't end with revenge. They just end with silence. And sometimes that's the saddest ending of all.